You know, the Dakota territory is through here, up through here, down along through here. It's all through the cinema, right? And then if we go back to our other map, it runs along the same. Now, we did these maps independent of this other map. So for them to coincide with that is either coincidence or, we may know what we're talking about. Okay, so I want to talk about present day. We have our reserve in both Canada and the United States. If you're going to take your family out for dinner, or you're going to have a birthday party at a local pizza joint, or you order a reservation, right? So you go on that day, you go eat, and you leave. Is that table still yours? No, you only have the reservation for the time that you're using it. Well, the reserves that we have in Canada and the United States are the same principle. They're reserved for use by Indians. So in the Indian Act, it said that reserves are land set aside for use by Indians. It's held in trust by the federal government, so they own title to the land, right? A reserve is owned by the federal government, either in Canada or the United States. Okay, that offer that was given to us previously, right? We were going to give us $6.7 million each. We could buy land with it. And what did they want us to do with it? Convert it to reserve, right? Because some people would have tax exemption. Right? So the treaty reserves or the treaty Indians in Canada, they have what they call a treaty land entitlement. Right? So back in the day, there was 1,000 people in that community or in that treaty base that was going to sign a treaty. Well, you divide that by 5, and you get 200. So they would be eligible. Each family of 5 was eligible for 160 acres. That was the Homestead Act. They could take 200 people times 160 acres. That's pretty big land. Right? So what the federal government is doing now in Canada is they're saying, well, we afforded you all this land back then. So in lieu of that, we're gonna settle with you with treaty land entitlement settlement. Some of these treaty bands have received anywhere from $80 million to $120 million, but they don't get it. It's put in trust for them, right? Because they're wards of the government. They can't handle their money. You put it in trust, and they tell them that you can go out and you can buy land with this money, buy some simple land. And when you do that, we'll convert it to reserve status for you, so that's exempt. So the treaty Indians take this money, they go buy land, and then the government of Canada will convert it to reserve status for them. So what have they just done? They've given that land back to the Canadian government again. So again, they don't own anything. Only thing that they have is this tax exemption of the treaty business. Meaning, we tried to explain that to the treaty Indians, but they weren't listening to us. And so we use this as an example. In 1942, Second World War was on, right? And the Department of National Defense wanted Stony Point Reserve. This is Lake Huron, this is Stony Point Reserve, and this is the Kettle Reserve. We wanted the Stony Point Reserve for military training camp. We began investigating the site February 1942. In April, the Indian agent is he administers the funds, he does everything for the reserve. Right? The Indian agent tried to get a volunteer surrender to Kettle and Stony Point land refused. But the Canadian government wanted us for these Indians to move over to this reserve. Stony Point Indians, the ones that were still from this reserve, they occupied it. This became Chippewa National Park. And so after the summer season was over, they occupied it peaceful. There was no guns, no nothing, they just occupied it. And the government wouldn't give them back this land, even though that's what they had agreed to in the first place. They wouldn't give it back to them. So they were there for about a week, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, the Ontario Police Force showed up in full riot gear. Batons and the helmets and the shields, everything. And they went in there by force. One of the guys that was there came to the fence. There's a fence separating the two, and this was in moonlight, and he was carrying a stick. And one of the snipers decided that the stick was a rifle, and he shot him. He didn't kill him, so he shot him again. So he took him to the hospital. He was bleeding, and he died. So they started an investigation. All of the police officers that took part in this raid all backed each other up except for one. The guy that shot the protester, fellow standing behind him, and he took the stand. He said, no. He said he did not have a rifle in his hand. He had a piece of stick in his hand. So the judge went to that point, and they X'd out where they were standing, where the protester was on the other side of the fence, and he could clearly say if somebody was carrying a stick or a weapon, they would know. And so he convicted that police officer of manslaughter, 2 years less to take. So the family said, well, that's great, that's justice, sort of, for our family members. But now we want to find out who gave this order. You know, the policemen, they have order in their ranks, right? So somebody has to give them the order to be in full riot gear and to go there. So they started an inquiry. In 2006, 6 years ago, the premier at the time that order was given, the premier at that time was Mike Harris. And they released the transcript. And they also released the phone call that he had made. And he said, get those effing Indians out of it. So that's how far after that inquiry was on. It went all the way back to the premier. He gave the order for that to, he didn't command us to kill anybody, but it just happened that way. So when we say their reserves do not belong to the native people, this is proof of it. We also know that because we've asked on the United States side, some of our Dakota community, if you don't believe us, then go ask for the titles to the land. A lot of you have land here, you have titles to the land. Well, we don't. It's held in trust by the federal government. So a lot of what we do, it's done out of necessity, not because we're trying to be militant or anything of that nature. That what our elders, what my uncle has been fighting for all these years is, all we want to do is look after ourselves. We don't want to be spoon-fed. We don't want anybody looking after us. That community that we come from, Sioux Valley, was one of the most prosperous communities in Canada. Not reserve, but a prosperous community. Back in the day, we used to have steam crushing machines. We had 3 of them. And we bought these with our own money. Even though it was called a reserve, we still had our own money. We didn't believe in union act. We didn't want any help from the government. So we used to have gardens, and we used to plant crops, and we used to do everything. And our men used to go work in the neighboring with the farmers. And they also say that they used to take the threshing machines and they used to go and help the neighboring farmers. So what's wrong with that? Instead, they bring in the Indian agents. I don't know if a lot of you guys are familiar with the Bible or not, but they say that when the Antichrist shows up, you can't buy anything, you can't sell anything, you can't do anything unless you have this mark of the beast, right? Well, during the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, when the Indian agents were sent to the reserve, my uncle, our elders, my grandfather, they could not leave the reserve. They could not buy anything. They could not sell anything unless you had a piece of paper from the Indian agent that they could leave the reserve. But he controlled everything. He controlled the money. So some of our veterans after the Second World War, everybody in Canada, all the veterans were given a parcel of land and they were given money so that they could start a farm. Well, what happened on our reserve, in the reserves of Canada, was that they gave them 160 acres, but they gave it to them on the reserve. And the money that they received, the Indian agent took it. He went and bought all this equipment, and according to my uncle and the elders, this was all equipment that wasn't big enough or didn't have the capacity to do what it was supposed to do. So the government, through the years, they've killed every economic development opportunity that we had. And then they brought welfare into the picture, and that basically killed them. And so you don't want to live on handouts, right? So we made an agreement with the Mohawk Six Nations. Six Nations are also of the same belief that we are. They've never signed a treaty with the government either. And their reserves straddle both sides of the border. And I don't know if you guys remember, in 1992, there was what they call that open incident in Montreal, Quebec. Well, you go over this Mercy Bridge, they call it, right? And you don't know where Montreal ends, and you don't know where the Kanawaki Reserve begins. But you go there now, and you can tell where it is because there's a street there. And Kanawaki is basically a suburb of Montreal. But what the Mohawks did was they exercised their sovereignty, and they started making their own tobacco, selling their own cigarettes. And so when you go there now, you know where this border is between the two, because on one side you've got smoke shops all along the highway, on the other side you don't. And so that, of course, when these tobacco products, these cigarettes, are licensed by Canada, right? They're licensed by Canada, but the province doesn't have their tape on it. And this is the package of those cigarettes. So there's a stamp. There's a Canadian stamp. It's just like a postage stamp that goes on here. You have to break it or it's open, right? And then the cellophane wrapping that goes around here, there's a tearaway tape on here. Well, that's where the province has their duty paid stamp on it, right? So we took Canada to court in 2009, right? And nothing happened. Canada didn't want to help us with anything. So what we did was we made an agreement with the Mohawks. We were going to sell their cigarettes. We bought a piece of property off the reserve, a simple property off the reserve, and we started selling cigarettes. Now, prior to doing that, this was November of last year when we started it. So we wrote letters to the municipalities, to the province, which is like the state down here, and then we wrote letters to Canada and we informed them what we were doing. We're not asking them for permission. We're informing them that this is what we're going to do. So of course we get the standing letters back saying, you're Indian, you can't do anything. And so we opened up November 9th of last year, and we notified all the press and everybody, and through the previous years, there's other reserves, other Indians, like treaty Indians, that try to do this. And as soon as they do that, the first time they try and open up the Royal Canadian Monasteries come in, and they shut them down. They raid them and they shut them down. And you never hear about it again. So we had the precedent. We had satellite trucks, and everybody came into the store that afternoon, and nothing happened. So we opened up again the next day, the next day, the next day after that. Finally, a week later, we got rated. And so the press they were having a field day with us. This is great. We were making national headlines right across Canada. And so what happened previous with the other Indians in the area, or the different provinces, when they get ready to be shut down, you never hear about it again. They ask us, well, what do you guys gonna do? Well, it's business as usual. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're gonna open up against tomorrow. And I was talking on the phone. I could tell I went on the speakerphone because all of a sudden I could hear background noise. And they said, well, you guys got raided. What are you gonna open up? Well, I said, come on, we knew we were gonna get raided. You think we're gonna keep all our inventory in one place? They kind of chuckling to that. So you have your products in different places. And you said, well, we're not gonna comment on us, just that we have products. And so we'll be back tomorrow. So the press showed up en masse again, the satellite trucks and everything, and waited for the cavalry to arrive, and nobody showed up again. So it wasn't until 2 or 3 weeks later that we got raided again. Same thing. They took what we had on the shelves, took what money we had, and this went on for, we got raided 5 times between then and May. And then the province. What the initial plan was not just for economic development, but it was also to take the province into charging them. Because Canada wasn't finishing out the court battle with us, so we took the province. And so the province charged them, and we ended up in court with them. So there's a little bit of a story here. That when we had our initial lawyer with our court case in Canada, and then when we got into this